What's up, booktube? It's Lane Cooper, and I look haggard and tired because I'm tired and a little bit haggard, and I might be getting sick, and I have to go to work in half an hour. So I'm just like getting this filmed before I have to run out the door, basically. What is this? Oh, so today we're talking about all the books I read in January. And I'm also going to be doing some like check-ins on my personal reading challenges because I want to stay accountable to those this year. And I'll have my stats at some point if my raggedy ass laptop ever decides to load anything again. Don't buy a MacBook. Save yourself the money. Don't ever buy one because 7 years later it'll still work perfectly fine, but Mac will put out an OS update that breaks your laptop because they don't want you to keep their tech that long without replacing it. Anyway, 20 years later, my spreadsheet will finally load. So, the things I read this month, that's the other thing. I'm waiting for my spreadsheets to load so that I actually have the order in which I read everything. Terrible. I did okay this month. I know I read about 5 books, and I almost finished a 6th. Like, I would have finished the 6th, but my hold on it, my loan of it from the library expired, and with 45 minutes left of the audiobook, and I'm on hold to get it again, so close. So that does mean I am 1 book behind on my reading goal because I need to read 6 books a month, but I know that in the first couple months of the year I'm just going to fall a little bit behind because February is Tome Topple, and I know I'm going to be reading some big chunky books for that. Okay. So, the first thing I finished in the month of January was Glamour and Glass by Mary Robinette Kowell. I read this on ebook from my library. This is the second book in the Glamorous Histories series by Mary Robinette Kowell, which is like Jane Austen with magic. And I think all of the books follow the same couple from the initial book. The second one definitely did, and I know the fourth one does. So, I think that's safe to assume. And I really like it. It's one of the first book had one of the few romances in it that I've actually not completely hated. I actually kind of liked it, and I think it's because it was such a minor part of the book. It didn't bug me. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. This second book, I think I gave it a 4 stars. I really liked the first half of it, and then it fell into that really classic trope of, oh, we're doing a multi-book series with a heterosexual couple. Book 2 obviously means that they have to get pregnant. Really? Blah. Just blah. I hate that trope. Like, I hate that trope so deeply. I also hate the trope of, like, you get married and, like, immediately she gets accidentally pregnant. You weren't trying. You were just having normal marital sex and she immediately got pregnant. Like, I know that does happen for some people, but like for a lot of people that just doesn't happen. And it's such a cliche. It's such an annoying cliche that reduces these female heroines to like mothers, which is fine. You know, if you're really into that, that's cool. I'm not into that, and I'm not into reading about it particularly. And it's just annoying, especially like in a character who's like ostensibly not interested in children, but of course by the end of this she is. Anyway, I also didn't like how magic worked with pregnancy. Like, women don't become aliens when they become pregnant. Like, and there's this whole thing where when you become pregnant you can't do magic anymore in this universe, and it's just so bullshit. Like, women don't become, I don't know, gargoyles when they become pregnant, or like horses or something. Like, they don't, it's just, none of those are good examples, but I'm just like annoyed by that take. And in the author's note, Mary Robinette Kowell says she was inspired to write this because some male colleague came up to her at like a Worldcon or something and was like, this is really interesting, but what would happen, you know, with the magic if the women become pregnant, blah blah blah. And it's like, they'd go about their fucking lives. Anyway, I don't know. Those are just some like tropes that are really common in these kinds of stories that really fucking bugged me. I do still plan to continue with the series because I do like the characters, and I think the world is kind of interesting, and I'm hoping this doesn't become such a big thing. Because, like, obviously, I think another good example of this happening in a series is, like, Gail Carriger does basically the same thing in her Parasol Protector books. It's so annoying. It's just annoying. Anyway, okay, let's move on. I might have to lower my star rating in my spreadsheet on that book, because now that I'm, like, reflecting, like, so much of it I thought was really, really good. And then that aspect is so irritating. Okay, we're done. We're moving on. The next thing I finished, was The Emperor's Edge by Lindsay Buroker. I read this, I own this on ebook, and I started reading this, like, the tail end of last year. And so I put out this poll on Twitter in December, asking if I should read After Atlas or The Emperor's Edge, because After Atlas is like a sci-fi detective, and I thought The Emperor's Edge was going to be fantasy detective, or like fantasy steampunk detective, because the character is a cop at the beginning of the story, and I'd read like part of the first chapter, and so I knew that, and I was like, oh, cool. But that wasn't the story I got, and unfortunately, I can't give this book a very high star rating because I respect Lindsay Buroker a lot. She's an amazing self-published author, and like has an amazing work ethic, and is so like positive and upbeat and supportive in the community, etc. And I do actually quite enjoy her book Bounce on the Blade's Edge, which is in a different series that she wrote years later. This is her like debut book that I've always wanted to read. And unfortunately, this book suffered from that thing that happens when an author wants to tell a particular story, so they warp their plot so that they can tell that story, instead of creating a plot that logically enables that story, if that makes sense. And it... like when you corrupt your plot to suit your means, it's a really good way to break your reader out of that sense of suspension of disbelief that pretty much all readers have to dive deeply into a book. And it just really highlights all the flaws in your narrative. And so fundamentally, there's this main plot part of this story, which involves counterfeiting, which is illogical, like from our world, in their world, in all worlds, and just kind of silly, bad silly, dumb silly. And the fact that like everything is built off of this not good foundation means the whole book's pretty difficult to enjoy. I did appreciate the very end. There's kind of this Guild Wars 2, like Destiny's Edge kind of feel to something that happens to it, and I appreciate that part, but like the rest of it, it like such a shaky, unbelievable foundation. It was a struggle. It was a bit of a slog to get through. I'm sad. And while I was reading that, I actually had to take a couple of breaks to read some other stuff, like start other stuff. One of the things I started and finished was The Camelot Caper by Elizabeth Peters. This is the prequel novel in the Vicky Bliss series, and I don't know how it's a prequel novel because Vicky Bliss isn't in it. I am currently reading the first Vicky Bliss novel, and I still don't know how it's a prequel. But anyways, I enjoyed this. It is definitely not without its flaws. It has some... not necessarily racism in it, though it's like a 1960s, like English countryside caper. It is truly, it's a Camelot caper. It is truly a caper. It's about a woman who, an American, her father was English, so she's come to England after he's died. Her grandfather's dying, and he's requested her to come visit him, and she's on holiday, and this guy at the airport accosts her and then starts chasing her around the countryside, and she runs into this other guy, I can't remember his name, David Randall. He's a novelist who writes, like ladies, fantastical detective fiction type stuff. And he like decides to help her, and they're just like, it's like a cat and mouse game all over Cornwall, and it's utterly ridiculous. Like I said, there are some problematic elements. There is some like serious fat phobia, which I think it's just a thing in Elizabeth Peters books. Like, she has a really horrible way of referencing people with quote unquote fat body types or overweight body types. But like the woman in this one, for instance, is like the girl, Jess, I think names her as like 160 pounds, which isn't even overweight. Unless, like, maybe you're under 5 foot. I don't know. Like, it was so bizarre. And there's been a tiny bit of that in this one, and I think it's just an Elizabeth Peters thing. I think it's a 60s, 70s fat phobic prejudice language thing. Like, obviously, body rights and stuff is like a fairly new social movement. So it's unfortunate. It's completely unnecessary and so jarring every single time it happens. But other than that, this was ridiculous and entertaining, which is all I wanted from it. It's not super high quality literature or anything. It's just, it's so silly. It's amusing. It's entertaining. That's what I'm going to say about that. And then after that, I finished listening to an audiobook. I finished The Ghost Bride by Yang Zi Cho. This was, I was listening to 2 audiobooks this month. This is the one I finished. And this is quite a long audiobook. I honestly picked it up because I was just looking, I always look at my available now section of my library's audiobooks when I'm looking for an audiobook when like I finished an audiobook series and I don't know what to pick up next. And I was browsing historical fiction because I was just kind of in the mood for something different. And I saw this, and it takes place in like late 1800s Malaya and British rule Malaya, if I remember correctly. It's narrated by the author, who does such an amazing job. And I thought it was going to be a pretty traditional historical fiction novel based on like the title, The Ghost Bride, about like maybe a girl who enters into like a ghost bride situation, moves into a family house, and then tries to find happiness. That's kind of what I thought it was going to be. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I just wanted to read something a little bit different than what I have been reading, which is a lot of SFF. It turned into an actual like supernatural fantasy fairy tale retelling, which was like totally in line with my usual reading tastes, like completely accidentally. It is about a girl from an unfortunate, or not, a family that's fallen on hard times, like monetarily, and another rich and powerful family who offers her like the job, you might say, of marrying their recently deceased son and being his ghost bride, and she does not want to do that. And then the son starts appearing to her in her dreams, and it's a nightmare. And there's all this stuff with like the underworld and the judges of hell and ghosts and demons and dragons at one point. And yeah, so it's like a super cool like fairy tale retelling. It's really good. I gave it 5 stars. Maybe it's like a 4.5, 5. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. If that kind of stuff sounds at all interesting to you, I would definitely pick it up, and I would definitely pick it up on audiobook, because again, the author's narration is so good. Like, I want to find out if she's done any other audiobooks, like for books that aren't her own, maybe, because I would definitely listen to her narrate more stuff. And I know she has a new book out last year, which I will probably pick up on audiobook if I can find it. And then the last thing I got finished in the month was Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. So both of these 2 books were on my 20 books to read in 2020. I picked this. This was my pick for my tried chapter tag, where my boyfriend actually ended up picking the book from my books that I tried chapters out of. And this turned out to be really good. I gave it like a solid 4 stars. It was funny reading it. I was like, why was I afraid I wouldn't like be able to get into this book? It's not as hard of science fiction as I'd kind of thought it would be, because it doesn't really feel very technical. It doesn't feel like technical military SF. I think if you like 9 Foxy Ambit, you'll definitely like this. What's another good suggestion? I don't know if I have another good suggestion, but I really think if you at all liked Nine Fox Gambit, you will 100% like this. Yeah, easy comparison. This is about a ship who has its consciousness implanted in a bunch of ancillary bodies, which are just human bodies that have been subjugated by the Empire and turned into drones for AIs. And the ship has been blown up, and all that's left is one ancillary body seeking revenge. And it's really good. It's really interesting. I love the way it's told. It's told in for the first like 60% in dual timeline, and I loved how that all unspooled and came together. I thought the character that 1S19 found was in the snow was very interesting, and I thought their development with the ancillary, it's my work phone numbers, I should probably keep that. Okay, I thought they were interesting. Their character growth and like the character relationship between them was really interesting. I'll definitely read the rest of these because I want to find out more of what happens. I'm definitely like curious to see what happens in the next one. I don't want to say if you've read this and like the thing that happens right at the end with the promotion, very curious how that's going to turn out. I love the character. I do love the ancillary AI character, Justice of Torin. I love them. I think they're very interesting. Oh, if you like the Murderbot books, you'll like this because again, it's kind of got a similar protagonist. So yeah, Murderbot or Nine Fox Gambit. If you liked either of those stories, try this. Don't be afraid of this. I feel silly for being so worried or concerned about this. I think it's because people held this up as like really hard sci-fi or like military sci-fi, and it has a few of those elements, but there's a lot of like one-on-one boots on the ground type stuff. There's a lot of like social commentary and philosophical debate in this that's not, yeah, I wouldn't be like turned off by those like descriptions of this, because this does not feel as hard sci-fi or hard military sci-fi as I expected it to be. So yeah, I definitely should have read this years ago. It was good. It was really good. I hope the other ones come into the store. I don't really expect them to. I'm probably going to end up having to like transfer them from other stores so that I can get copies, or reading them from the library. That's the other thing I could do. Then like I said, I was listening to another audiobook. I almost finished it. That was Penrick's Mission by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the longest installment in the Penrick and Desdemona novella series so far. This one is actually, I think, qualifies as a novel. I'm going to check the page count on my spreadsheet real fast. Yeah, so this one's actually 264 pages in most editions, and the audiobook is 5.5 hours, making it like a whole hour longer than the previous novellas. That being said, I was literally 45 minutes away from the end when my loan on this expired, and I just couldn't quite finish it, which is just such a bummer. And now I'm just waiting to get it back so that I can just like literally just sit down and listen to the end. I'm really enjoying this. It is a big time leap from the previous Penrick novels, but it does take place in like another kingdom, city-state across the sea, and there's a lot of politics and adventure, and I still love Penrick and Desdemona as characters, and there's a couple other characters in this that are really interesting. Penrick's powers have definitely like grown. We finally got some background on like the sort of political things that have happened to him since we last saw him, which were very interesting, and kind of like, oh man, poor Penrick. He's like in a really like awkward transitional period right now. I just really like this series. I think this series is really good. I decided to go ahead and put a hold on The Curse of Chelian, which takes place like 1,000 years after Penrick's time. I'm gonna probably listen to that, I hope, for Tome Topple if it comes in on time. I'm really loving this Realm of the Five Gods by Lois McMaster Bujold. I'm definitely eventually going to get to all of the books in this universe because I really thoroughly enjoy it and her writing. Okay, so let's talk about quick stats wrap up. My goal this year is to read 72 books. That means I need to read 6 books per month. I read 5 books per month, which means I'm 1 book behind. but it's not the end of the world because I am almost done with an audiobook, 20% into another audiobook, and about 25% into my next book. So I don't know if I'm going to make up progress next month or just like stay on track. We'll see. Those 5 things totaled 1,690 pages. And that means my average page length is 338. So these stats are really skewed because I've only read 5 things. Generally, my average page count per thing I read is more like 260 because I do tend to read shorter things. That may change this year because I am challenging myself to read more long stuff, but I don't know. 1,690 is a pretty average number of pages for me though in a month. I'm not going to go into genres or anything because I just haven't read enough to make that stat interesting. I will say 1 out of 5 things, therefore 20% of what I've read, has been on audiobook. That's slightly under for me this month, but if I'd finished that other Penrick book, obviously that percentage would be slightly higher and actually pretty in line with what percentage of audio makes up my total reading for the last couple of years. 16% of what I read was digital, 40% was physical. That's just because I read a couple of things from the library that I wasn't really planning to read, but I did. And also I read a Kindle book that I owned. So then my other main goal is to read stuff that I own. And I did pretty good this month. I only read 40% of what I read was from the library, 40% was from my physical collection, and 20% was a Kindle book that I own. So 60% of what I read came from my own collection, 40% was from the library, and that's pretty like on track for what I want to do. Ultimately, I want to make it closer to 70% of what I read be from my own collection, but I think this is a really strong start. My other goal, obviously, is to read the 20 books in 2020, which is what this cubby is. These are all the books. And like I said, 2 down, 18 to go. So I do want to try to stack the cards in as much in the front half of the year, getting as many of these done as I can. That way I'm not in the last quarter of the year needing to read like 4 books a month off the shelf. So I do need to stay conscious of this goal, and I do still need to make an effort to make progress in it, but we're starting out strong. Okay. That's all the time I have today. I have to go get ready for work. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.